Hey everyone, welcome back to OTD Military History. Today is another live stream looking at a World War II topic, and Normandy, which a lot of you know is pretty close to my heart and the area I love going to and talking about and all that good stuff. So today's guest is different from what we normally have on. Normally have historians and history-aligned people. Today we have an archaeologist, but one who's worked on battlefields and all different kinds of other archaeological projects. I know I have probably what are going to be dumb, simple questions, but I want to finally get some answers and figure these things out. So we have Denis Renaud is on today, and we're going to be talking about a very specific personal case that's connected to archaeology. And that's just one of the things we want to keep in mind as we're moving through with this, is that it's a personal story, and you'll see as we move along, but also what archaeology can do for things like these personal stories for something that happened roughly 80 years ago. So it's going to be a good one, and I'm excited to get into it. So how are you today?
Fine. Thank you for having me, Brad.
Well, thank you for coming on. I appreciate it, and taking time, because I know the school year is starting soon. So taking time to come on and talk about this project. Just want to ask, as I always ask, is how did you get into this? How did you get into doing an archaeological dig in this area south of Caen in Normandy?
So it all started actually, I'm a professional archaeologist. I already had my background in classical Greece. So I did digs in Greece years ago. And at one point I realized that archaeology could be complement history and could bring some specific answers. I know it was integrated in Great Britain at the University of Glasgow. It was integrated in France. It started with medieval archaeology, then First World War, and then Second World War. But it's only until very recently that it's been integrated in France in 2014. So I thought, since I teach archaeology, I integrated a module in one of my classes to see how it would go and bring answers to that. And the opportunity came actually after I came back. I returned to France, to have a master's.
Okay.
On battlefield archaeology in 2014. So when I was there, in the newspaper, there was an article about French archaeologists from a national organization called INRAP, Institut National de Recherche Archéologique Préventive, that were digging on Canadian positions south of Caen in Fleury-sur-Orne. And they just had found the position of the Canadian 5th Brigade plus artillery regiments. I said, oh my God, that's awesome. And I got in touch with some people I knew at INRAP, and we started a conversation about would they know someone for my PhD. I was looking for a director because mine was retiring. And they said, no, we don't know anybody, but could you help us with your expertise in our research? I said, yeah, sure. And it started like that. So this was in summer 2014. And in October, I received a photo from a colleague of mine, French archaeologist Vincent Tessier, who the day before, actually it was on October 28th, and on the 27th, he had just found a little bracelet under an ammunition box in Fleury-sur-Orne, in one of the hundreds of slit trenches that they were recovering from the 5th Brigade and the Artillery Regiment. So he immediately knew that this was a personal ID item. So when I saw the picture, I said, well, I concur, because I found that this would be a personal item. So I started to investigate who could it be. So on one side of the bracelet, and maybe we can look at the first slide here, Brad.
Let me get that pulled up.
Yeah. So on the first side, there were HF and service number B44812. So the service number was easy. As you know, in Canada, there are regions, and we knew it was from artillery. And he volunteered and joined in the 2nd District Depot in Toronto. But I wanted to find who HF was. And on the other side, there was another message from Rose. So some people told me, oh, that's like a movie scenario. You have everything there to... They thought about Rose on the Titanic and Jack, and
yeah,
kind of agree. But quickly on Rose, because I always tend to forget, I speak a lot about HF that I will name in a few seconds. But Rose would likely have been a British sweetheart that HF would have met while he was overseas. So after a while, my research came to some conclusion. I found that with Library and Archives Canada, HF was Harry Edward Fox from Toronto. It took a while back then because, as you know, requesting personal military files was longer. Now it's faster. It's almost supersonic. It takes 3 weeks to a month. I asked some files recently. My God, I received the answer, but then it was way longer. That's why it took so long. So I had a first request. Since I was not a member of the family, most of it, was redacted. So it's kind of frustrating. But I kept going, and then I had the name. The regiment, we thought it was the 5th field, but it was the 6th field. And I kept my research. Then at one point, it was into a dead end. And I think we can look at the next one. So I started to investigate while I was looking into the archives and all the library and archives, military war diaries, you name it. I started to look on internet for cemeteries, databases that could bring hopefully any clue, any hint, no matter how small it would be. And at one point, I found a photo, not this one, but we'll see that in a few moments, where there was a tombstone with a man from the Toronto area. I was assuming that it could be good to look in the Toronto area because veterans usually returned to their hometown. So since he was born in New York, which I found out after, I said, well, maybe he just returned to the Toronto, which was right. So I found that tombstone, Harry E. Fox with his wife, Doreen, but I was looking for Rose. Say, okay, it might not be him. So I passed this photo and I kept going. Then I came back. I think it's the next one, Brad. Yeah, this one. I should have put them before. But so I saw this photo and said, okay, if it's the Harry E. Fox I'm looking for, it has to be in Toronto. So I got in touch with the person, a young woman who had posted it on a site for tombstone and grave. And we can return to the photo just before, Brad, sorry.
Yep, there we go.
Yeah, so she said, yeah, it's me. So I gave her my credentials. I said, okay, it's not a hoax. I'm a researcher. I gave the details. I knew that Harry had lost a finger in a breach accident on March 6, 1945. I knew he had 5 medals. So she made some research in the local paper and sent me this 1 week after we spoke. So the first thing, I checked 2 things actually when I received that photo. The 5 medals, they all matched. I said, wow. So my blood pressure went up. Then I checked his left hand. And if you look carefully, see that all the fingers are folded except one. Why would it be extended except if it's a prosthesis? And that's actually, I said, okay, I think I'm 99 point something sure it's him, but I needed the scientific confirmation, which would come actually from the family also based on all the details I had. And I said, I think that's the man. So another week passed, and then she had contacted, in the meantime, Harry's family. Right. And she sent me a message saying, good news, Denis, looks like you found your man. So that's, the family confirmed every detail. So that was like the holy grail, or I don't know, the quest you do in one's life. Yeah. You expect to see an end, and all of a sudden the end is coming and say, oh my God. Yeah. I find myself very fortunate to have known that moment, like Indiana Jones moment, but with less violence.
Yeah, it's a special moment when that happens for sure.
Yeah, so we can go to the 2 next one. Yeah, so once I knew, and this was confirmed, I could say that, okay, Harry was the man, and he actually enlisted. He went for his training in Camrose and Shiloh, Manitoba, and he was sent in 1943. He landed in Scotland, and he joined in the 6th Field Regiment. As we know, actually, his regiment didn't take part in D-Day, but it came on July 8th with the 2nd Division, so in support of what was actually going on. Actually, he landed more or less during Operation Charnwood, when they were bombing camp. that's another topic, but I briefly address it in the book. That was it useful to bomb camp, or yes or no? So I'll let the historian debate on that, but it doesn't seem that it was very useful. So anyway, he landed on that day, the next one. So we see him here with his uniform and obviously the nice and beautiful artillery cap badge.
Yep.
Next one. And he was assigned to the famous and glorious 25-pounder.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously, that's like many regiments, the gun of all trade, I would say, because it was used to various uses and very, very reliable gun.
Yes.
Next one.
Yeah, I was just going to quickly say it wasn't supposed to be a gun for everything, but at certain points it was.
Yeah.
Until they figured it all out and got the proper anti-tank guns. But that's for another time.
So I was able to actually I was given two very nice gifts from the man who found the bracelet. So as I mentioned, it's a French archaeologist, Vincent Tessier. He gave me an original shoulder patch from the 6th RA, and also the next one, cap badge. Both. Oh, sorry, no, that's the list here.
There. Yep.
6 RA. Sorry, I thought I had the cap badge. But yeah, so that's an original that did the campaign. And on the next one, we see the organization that many people know about how field regiments are organized. So if we look at the 6th field, Harry was in the 13th Field Battery in Troop A. We know that from a little book that I was able to find that was written by two officers who were in the regiment and wrote it during the war and actually published it in September 1945 in Holland, just as the war ended. And it was all fresh in their memory. So there's lots of details that are in that book. And they mentioned actually Harry's situation when he was wounded on March 6, 1945. Actually, I knew from the family that he was not supposed to take a shift, but he replaced a friend of his that was supposed to do it. So his friend went for a nap, and had it been him, he wouldn't have been wounded or God knows what. So basically, there was premature, and the gun was blown to bits. Nobody was killed. Some were hurt, as we know. Harry lost a finger, and he was repatriated to Great Britain. But he was lucky because, as we know, many never made it back. So, and that was close to the end of the war. So he went literally from Normandy, like many Canadians, all along the coast and through the hardships of the campaign in the Netherlands, and especially the Battle of the Scheldt. They took part in it too. So that was a muddy and terrible thing. So the next one. So we can see here on the map where the village is located. So Fleury-sur-Orne is south of Caen. And in 1944, that's right here, yeah. So 1944, it was like many French villages, rural farming, typical way of life based on the seasons, and that's how it was. It was not yet integrated into the city of Caen. Now, basically, suburbs have eaten away all the territory, and it's literally more or less integrated into a big part of Caen. But in 1944, such was not the case. It was surrounded by fields, and since Canadians had taken Caen after July 19th, they went down to pursue the Germans, and then that was the road to Falaise and so on. But they were there. What is interesting here is that they spent almost 2 weeks on one location. It was still the front. It was still dangerous, but it's archaeologically speaking, it's very good because 2 weeks is quite long. We're talking about a full brigade, 3 artillery regiments, service corps, more or less, that were there. So there are, we found, it's only a part of it, but 800 slit trenches, and that's only a percentage of the whole thing. Had we been able to do the whole site, and the digging took half a kilometer, so that's huge. Yeah. I mean, they uncovered a lot of earth, and the good news also is that it was on limestone. So after a while, you just take the earth, like 20, 30 centimeters, and then you're right on into the archaeological site. But I imagine, and so as we were digging, we saw that we realized, how hard it must have been in 1944 to dig in that, in the heat, the mud, the rain, because after the earth, there's the limestone, and then you had to go with pick and axes and shovel. That must have been quite a tedious task to do, actually, but they did it. So there were larger trenches than others. Most single slit trenches were to sleep, and sleep is a great verb here, trying to have a rest as much as you can, because you're fired upon. There are wasps, lice, heat, diseases with the stomach. Cliff Chatterton said that's the Normandy stomach.
Yeah.
Cramps, nausea, and everything. So based on some stuff that you took, especially the Calvados, but I'll be back on the Calvados later on. So this was the situation here. There was also another location that has not been as thoroughly studied as this one in Florissant, and it's where the 7th Brigade was, between If and Bras. So the If is literally, you cross the street and you're in If. So that's where it was. So it was a practical and convenient area to more or less rebuild after all the exhaustion from landing and actually taking time going southward here. So the next one. We see here another, I love primary sources because they tell us so much. And this one is from 1946. It's an aerial photo. You see the River Orne that is going on the left towards the end of the photo, right? And then you see that big square structure on the upper top right part. It's a prisoners of war camp, which was called La Grâce de Dieu, the grace of God. And actually, as I mentioned when I was doing the program with Paul, the Grace of God is the name of the tramway station that is right in this vicinity right now.
Yeah.
So it stems from that. And why do we have a prisoners of war camp here? And all the field that you can see here down there is where the 5th Brigade were. There were two roads. There's one like more or less going like a snake, but there's a straight one called Le Chemin des Anglais that was more or less, adapted by Canadian troops with bulldozers to bring in all the material. So I'll just return briefly to that prisoners of war camp. As we noticed, as soon as the Allied landed, they faced a logistical problem, which was the amount of German prisoners. There were so many of them. At one point, it reached 1 million. After a while, there are some authors and historians who did excellent books on that. There's one in French that really addresses thoroughly all the logistic and the consequences of that. So after a while, the Allied said, okay, what are we going to do with that? They've put some on the beaches. There were temporary beaches and closures, but it didn't do the job. So they shipped as many as they could to Great Britain. But after a while, they said, no, we need to find a solution. So they built what was called PWTE, Prisoners of War Temporary Enclosure. And this one was started as a small camp, but then it grew bigger. There was another big one in a village not far from there called Nonant-le-Pin, where at one point you had over 20,000 prisoners. And the first camp was very easy. I mean, it was a fence. You put Germans in there, and that's it. That's a camp. Yep. So that's how it started. Obviously, they were able to build some accommodations to get some sort of comfort. But then this one was built from actually 1944 and ended up until 1946, 47. At the peak, there was up to 12,000 German prisoners. And I was able to find one testimony of one of them, Hans Flint, who said that at one point they had to eat cats and people were fighting for a scrap of food. So conditions were harsh. But as I mentioned in the other interview, I mean, the French had just been occupied for 4 years by Germans, so they were not too keen about giving Hilton hotels comfortable living. So that's how it was. There's always a context. But this camp actually not really exist, no longer exist because the suburb is covering most of it. So we saw a part of it here. And when you see that field in the lower part of the photo, you see these grayish dots there. That's where you had artillery positions. And I must mention also that we found positions that belong to the Luftwaffe. So there was a flak battery that was on site. I made some research. I could not confirm because it was not possible to do so. Maybe later on, I could not confirm that it belonged to the Dritte Flak Corps. I know the Dritte Flak Corps was in Normandy. At one point on June the 10th, their commanding post was in Rerecich, which is southwest of Florissant. But some archives were destroyed by bombing, so the whereabouts are not definitely confirmed, but it was the flat, that's for sure. Yeah. Next one.
We just have a quick question. You mentioned it briefly, but and you said the suburb is taking the area, but is there any signs of the camp left and any?
Not really. Actually, we saw some of the tunnels that were done to make like pipes with ammunition boxes to drain wastewater.
Right.
That's the last traces we saw, because I forgot to mention that once the dig was over and it was in the agreement, the whole place would be filled in again. And now we'll see that later on. They built a whole warehouse for a tramway for maintenance. And so the whole place is covered now with a big hangar and a warehouse for a tramway. So technically, no, there are no traces yet.
Okay. There it is.
That's the hangar. So actually, we were digging right under this. So they built it fast. I mean, well, it was in 2016, the last dig. The first dig was in 2014. It lasted several weeks. 2016 was very short, a few weeks only. And we knew it was coming, but that's the beauty of the thing. And we are allowed to do so to preserve as much as we can.
Right.
Knowing that, well, modern life has to continue. So it's a compromise, and they call it preventive archaeology. So it allows us to do digs to save heritage or traces while we can. After that, it's gone. And that's an interesting topic too, because since well, no matter where you dig in France or in Europe, you'll find something somehow.
Yep.
Old, ancient, you name it. So you have to choose to keep some items. Some are very known. There are types of pottery we know, so we cannot keep everything. So that's a cruel decision, but you have to find a balance, I would say, because it's impossible to keep everything. It takes warehouse, hangar, lots of logistics. But some sites are not dug up because we know the content. They are surveyed, they are identified. Like this one was very important because Florissant is actually a case study, because I forgot to mention it at the beginning, but the fact that the bracelet was found in context, and I will say what context is in a second, was found in context up, actually from the ground up, to a family that is alive at the other end. It's a fantastic situation. Other bracelets were found, but they were not in context. The fields had been plowed, so it's still good, but it's not the same. So context is basically when you have all the layers, like I give always the example to my students of chocolate and vanilla cake, vanilla layer, chocolate cake. So you have, these are the layers in the ground. And when they are untouched, and such was the case here, it had been left as it was in July, August 1944 until it was found by my colleague in 2014. So that's what makes it a case study, because we have all the gun battery, all the slit trenches that were deeper actually associated with the gun. And that was fantastic. We found a brazier where they were reheating food. So you can tell from that position right there the daily life of gunners at the front. And it's a unique and a very enlightening picture that we can get from that. Yep. So this is how large the dig was. So you see Fouille 2014, that's dig 2014. As I said, it's almost half a kilometer. And there were two upper parts that were done in 2016, where you see part of the former prisoners of war camp. After, in the 50s or 60s, they built a soccer stadium, temporary sports facilities that were destroyed after a while. But life came back, and I mean, it's one layer on top of another, and each era brings its new requirements, its new needs, and buries what took place beneath it. So that's how it was. We were very lucky, actually. And all the dots that you see are slit trenches. As you can tell, there are a few of them, trenches from different regiments. It was not very easy to tell which trench would belong to a regiment. Actually, it was almost impossible. We could say it was Canadian for sure, but to which regiment, unless you find a cap badge or something, you can't, except for artillery, which is you have larger trenches and it's specifically out that's been bulldozed to put the gun. Then you can tell there's no mistake. And you see the red large line here is the Chemin des Anglais. That was a former road existing there, and that was reorganized to bring in actually supplies. We see how what it looks like today. It's a bit sad. We would like to preserve sites as they were, but it's impossible with modern life. City is going. So you can see where how far the city of Caen is eating away the fields. So you see the tramway warehouse that was not there in 2016. So it's already there. They've built other roads too. I didn't know it was there. So it went so fast. And you barely see Le Chemin des Anglais at the very bottom. And there are, I don't know, they're using limestone, or is there a concrete mill plant? I don't know what it is, but they're using it because it's a prime material for modern resources. So this is where the batteries were. So we can see, but it changes so fast that it has to be taken. And I always tell my students, obviously archaeology is a destruction process. Once you remove something, it's gone. So if you don't do it properly, well, you're doomed. I mean, you missed something. So it's the least imperfect we can do. So we try to take every information we can. Usually it's working well, but providing we know what we're doing. And that's another thing too, because the ground is very stubborn. And that's good because the slightest traces are the scars, you name it, are still there. If you can make them speak, you learn a lot of things, and it brings us back to context. That's so important. We see here the what used to be the flak trenches. They've been nicknamed crab pincer trenches because they're like the pincer of a crab, named by my colleague. We'll see them in a moment. And they were super well organized, wide, and they were reoccupied by Canadians. So those trenches were there, obviously, before the Allied reached that point. But we found shells from the so famous 88 millimeter gun and positions, and they were there. As I said, I could not confirm with certainty that it was the Dritte Flak Corps, but definitely a flak battery was there. So you see what it looks like, drawing to the scale, like a little crate, like an insect. I don't know. It's kind of an alien, weird creature.
It kind of looks crab-like, yeah.
And you see, it's very convenient, and it's this must have been a lot of work to dig too, because in limestone, as I said, we found those slit trenches, and my God, it must have been quite a tedious job.
Yeah, I bet it's. I've not dig any slit trenches or anything for a gun, but I've had to do digging, and it's not fun.
Oh no! On top of being shelled at and fired, oh my God, no.
Yeah, not great. Let's take this time to actually ask it now and give you a break from talking for a minute. But and this is something I don't do. Obviously, I don't do the archaeology part, but I've seen it, like you talked about. We were talking before. It's been getting more attention, and it's been integrated into the history work, and particularly in France, where a lot of the Canadian fighting happened to take place in both world wars. So I see it often. And this might sound dumb and it might sound obvious, but how do you know once you're digging down that you found a position, such as a slit trench or a gun pit? Is it different soil? Does the soil look different? Does it compact differently? Different rocks? Like I honestly wouldn't, if I like say, if I wouldn't be doing it, but if I were digging, I'd be like, I don't know what I'm looking at here. Like, how do you tell the difference once you're doing the actual work?
It's a very good question, Brad. Actually, it's two things you mentioned. There's what we call the density of the soil, the texture, the color. Sometimes color is of no use. I'll give you an example. I was in southern France looking for, we were digging on a Greek site, and it was all green clay. Okay. So at one point, oh my God. So texture, density, resistance, color, and then you can see if you shift from one layer to another, and also experience, I would say, basically. Once you've been digging and you know the feeling with the trowel, it's unbelievable the amount of information you can get just by scraping the ground. It seems a bit easy to say, but you feel it literally. Okay, there's a shift. It's hard, it's soft. Oh, there's something there. So you're always keenly aware of what you're doing is about to give you information. So if you start digging, obviously this was easy because we knew we could remove the topsoil, which was for farming. Right. That's not resumed. But after a while, we knew by primary sources, archives, that there had been trenches and there had been surveys prior to the dig too. And then you can detect in the texture, the resistance. But I'll come back to my example of the green clay. At some point, you cannot tell layers apart. So you create an artificial, what we call stratigraphy. Stratigraphy is all the layers one top of another. Right. When you have all of them, you have all the dates. So it creates a chronology. Okay. So you have all the layers. And let's say when the green clay again, you don't know the difference. So you create like 10 centimeter layers. And then at the very end of the dig, you can say, okay, layer A1 is like A2. So that's the same one. Okay. But that's easier to do so than to miss a layer. And I tell my students, because we do a practicum in class, we do a mini dig. Okay. And I tell them, if you're not sure, create another layer. After, at the very end, it's easy to say, okay, A3, A4 is together. It's easier to do that and say, oh, shoot, we missed something. And I tell them, don't go too fast. Sometimes went too fast, say, no, you'll miss something. So that's how it goes. And the main purpose, I didn't mention it yet, the main purpose of that dig was not to look for Second World War remnants. They knew there was some trouble, but they found actually a Neolithic colony that had monuments. So Neolithic is roughly 6,000 to 3,000 BC to give an idea of the date. And so there were over, 20 monuments that were found for the Neolithic. So the Second World War came as it was not the main goal. It was something that was done, but that was not the primary goal. Because especially if you're in Normandy, I mean, no matter where you dig, you'll find something from the Second World War. And I would say almost everywhere along the coast and Belgium and Netherlands, Germany, you name it. So once you know that, the idea was to really focus on what could be learned from that in terms of archives, but also and above all about artifacts. And we were very lucky. We found lots of interesting things, as we'll see in a minute. Next one. So again, I come back just to show the straight road, Le Chemin des Anglais, and south of it, where you see there's a pile of whatever, limestone, something. This is where the batteries were. So one who looks at that today would have no idea, basically, what took place there. However, we could look. There are not too many traces here, but what we call aerial archaeology, sorry. So you go by plane. Now they use drones. It's easier. Right. And all the traces remain in the ground, like if there's humidity, if it's dry. Yep. So the grass will grow a little more greener or yellow. So if it's yellow, maybe there's something underneath. So it's hard to grow. If it's green, it's because there's humidity, water, so it grows. And these are things you wouldn't see if you walk, because you're only 5-6 feet from the ground. But up there, you see the broad pictures. They use it a lot for a period called Gallo-Romain, the Roman Gaulish period.
Okay. Yep.
Yeah, so they find actually hundreds and hundreds of houses, like temple, Gallo-Roman temple. You see them, it's a perfect square in a field. You see, it's so clear, it's beautiful.
Yeah. I was just jump in real quick, because the only real other experience I have with this is First World War, and particularly parts around Arras and in Belgium. You can see where some of the old trenches were, especially when it rains, because you can see the chalk that had been disturbed in those areas. So like, that's just something I keep in mind too, is you can sort of tell sometimes. Again, you had to be pretty high up, but it is pretty cool that you can, lay people like us can see the difference without really, might not even know what we're looking at, but it is out there.
It's amazing. And as you mentioned, Brad, when you see it and you feel it in the ground, you can only realize the plight of soldiers who were there when it was raining, dead bodies, rats, animals, foot trench, you name it. So it must have been psychologically extremely difficult. So it brings a lot of admiration for all those young men who were caught into that horrible situation. So a famous photo from Library and Archives Canada. I have a little anecdote on the soldier too. So this is, as we know, the Nebelwerfer, the fog launcher from German. Yep. And this is a soldier from Le Regiment Maisonneuve, Pierre-Paul Beauchamp, and with Dr. Coyer from the Civil Defense. And this is in Carrière Sainte, because I didn't mention it yet, but on the side there was also a quarry in which civil were hiding. And I had the privilege and honor to interview one of the survivors who was there, Madame Yvette Le Timonier. She was 11 years old on July 19th in that quarry when she saw soldiers coming into the quarry. And she said, oh, they don't look like Germans. They didn't have the same uniform, and they were speaking French. So these were soldiers from Le Regiment Maisonneuve from Montreal. Yep. And these were the liberators. And she said it was unbelievable. So her dad stood up, started to sing the French national anthem. The soldiers stood at attention. And then they just hugged each other. They gave chocolate, cookies, and everything. And then she said a verb I'll never forget. She said we could breathe. Yes. After 4 years, we could breathe. And so these Nebelwerfers were posted near the quarry because it was well protected, and it was a good spot for that. And the anecdote on Pierre-Paul Beauchamp is that in another book from another veteran, Jean-Charles Charlie Forbes, who was a lieutenant in Le Regiment Maisonneuve, that I also had as a friend and as a veteran, I had the opportunity to interview. He was such an amazing person. And he wrote in his book that he published, I think, in 2002 or 94. I have to double check. Yeah, Pierre-Paul Beauchamp actually at one point was at the front and said, okay, we are leaving. So he was accused of desertion, but he came back on his own. So, and Lieutenant Forbes was charged to be his lawyer in military court.
Right, yep.
So he said, okay, if you don't find a good reason, it's not going to end well for you, boy. So he said, okay, I came back and I can prove it. So there were witnesses. Okay, that's absence without leave. It's not desertion. So finally he was acquitted, but it seems to have been quite a character, that young man. But it's funny to know that he was there.
Maybe he made a friend.
I think so.
In one of the villages, I would imagine.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
Yeah, no, that's a great story. And just, sorry, just give a little bit of context here is these, the smoke thrower or the fog thrower or whatever are launching rockets. And this is the area that a lot of people know, but might not know the nitty-gritty. It is very ridge. So this is why it was so hard to take. Germans dug in to this and used those, and they were hard to get at. So this is why it was so difficult. So this is a great picture and showing all of that and the great anecdotes. It's a great photo.
And also another anecdote based on this one.
Yeah.
Actually, the flag that you see here was created by Madame Le Timonier's father, who was a resistant, actually. He was removing bolts on the rail so that train would derail, not near Caen, but near Paris, so they wouldn't suspect him. And he was lucky not to have been shot because at one point they were arrested, and she said, an SS put me a bayonet right here under my throat. I say that's something you never forget.
Mm-hmm.
But since it was forbidden to fly the national French flag under occupation, they found a handy solution. So they found a tablecloth, a diaper in white, and a red dress, and they made the flag to honor the liberation. And she told me another thing I didn't know, but there were another entry for another quarry where no French citizens were going. Never. They never went there. Only Germans. They went there, but nobody was coming back. So they went to that entry of that quarry, but they went in, no one out. So she said, okay, because after a few meters, there's a big hole, and down there, there's water. So those who came in actually fell in the pit. French knew that. She said, well, passive resistance.
Yep. Yeah, we're not gonna tell you about that one.
Now it's been sealed because it's dangerous, but I bet there are a couple of skeletons down there, that's for sure.
Oh, I'm sure there's more than a few.
Yeah. So another one that is interesting, I'm not sure about that regiment, but it's an artillery regiment that was in Fleury-sur-Orne, July 28th, just when Harry Edward Fox was there. So I don't know if it's the 5th or the 6th, but there's a caption from Library and Archives. I'll make some research. The names are there. It would be quite easy to find, but they definitely are giving us an idea of what the site looked like in July 1944. It's very interesting to bring archives photos with the actual archaeological site and put them together and see what it looked like.
Yeah, that's always great to do.
Well, digging.
There we go.
Yeah, on actually during Operation Spring on July 25th, a very sad day for Canadians. But this is the Phantom Brigade that were digging in If, actually across Fleury-sur-Orne. And this gives a good idea also exactly what Canadians were doing in Fleury-sur-Orne, digging slit trench after slit trench. You see there's quite a good thickness of topsoil before you get into the limestone, but it must be close to limestone based on what I could detect here. And then the fun began because it's you had to use a pick and well, yeah, that was something.
Yeah, definitely not easy.
And based from the designs that they were using, according to military instructions, there's a manual from 1941 that explained how to dig trenches, the models, the distance, and it was respected quite well based on what we could find. And they were following the rules of the military booklet that told them how to dig it. And see, your question was very relevant, Brad.
Yeah.
When we can see, that's the perfect case to learn archaeology, I would say here, because you have all the limestone where you see kind of whitish, pale, and you see where you have brown, dark brown earth. It's definitely a slit trench. So that was easy to spot, but it's a good way to understand how you can see the differences between the grounds. And if I had to use a model to teach archaeology, that's what I would use. Actually, that's what I use, to be honest, because you see it's so crystal clear brown. Okay, you dig there. It's like an instruction. Dig me, dig me. So
well, that's why I wanted to ask a bit earlier. I was going to ask here because I went through, obviously, but and remember from Woody's channel. But I wanted to ask it in this one, but I thought it was too clear of where that's clearly what it is, right? You know, you can tell the difference, and it's just amazing that it I don't know. Again, I don't know. I'm a layperson here, but it doesn't seem that far down to be that you had to dig to find this. So I mean, just looking at the side there, it doesn't look like it's very far down. So it's so interesting that it sticks out, but because of the materials there, it's.
You're right, Brad. And depending on the site and where you are in France, I know southern France in the Pyrenees, you have all the caves where cavemen were living. So you can go maybe 10, 20 meters deep because depending on the environment. But as you say here, 30 centimeters, and there you go. And I've been in Greece too, in some locations where maybe 5 centimeters and you're 2,000 years before Christ, just like that, because nobody came in after. Right. And the ground was not really disturbed. So you're just a matter of inches or centimeter between today and 5,000 years ago. It's really impressive.
That's wild. Yeah, I guess, I never thought about that, but human interaction, I don't know if that's the right term, but obviously makes a difference in these things. Because I always see it sometimes as the different types of roads. That's how people like to show the different the time periods. Right. Again, that's how I kind of think about these things, but it's fascinating stuff.
One thing you mentioned, very important, Brad, is that how does it build, how layers are built actually with human action, but also natural erosion, winds, rain, everything. There are shifts in the ground too that can, because layers are more or less alive. It's not a static thing. It moves depending on the shift and the weight. And that's why most of several modern roads are, especially in Europe, are based on former ancient Roman roads.
Yep.
Because they say we cannot reinvent the wheel. Where the Romans were, they had a good spot. Well, and Roman roads are so amazing. Usually you see a line of green bushes along the road that tells you where the ditches were, so it gives you humidity. That's another hint to find roads. So same thing here. They reused some of the former roads.
Yeah, it's fascinating stuff.
This is one of the trenches I did dig up. So at first, Canadians used it for their own protection, but then after a while, they had to leave. So they used it to fill it with garbage. And among other things, bottles, beer bottles, intact, most of them. So it was good for the morale.
Shocking. Very shocking.
Most were British beer because for practical reason, it's easier to bring it from Great Britain rather than crossing the ocean. You don't want your beer to be sunk by German U-boats. So you want to have your boat, not your boat, but your beer ready at the ready. And you see on the top part, there are little square, transparent, more or less transparent bottles. Right. Those were A1 sauce. So this tells us right away they were eating meat. So this is a sauce for meat. So little tiny details that gives you hints on the daily life. There were other trenches where you had cans, sardine, potatoes, They chose, like this one was for bottles. I don't know why, but this must have been the gathering.
The drinking trench? I don't know.
I don't know. But you have to be careful not to get cut. But we found actually lots of bottles over there. We were able to identify where they came from. Some were French beers. And there was an anecdote I was telling with Paul on World War II TV about Calvados or Calva.
Yes.
Some soldiers tried it but said it's not a very good idea. Some compared it to nitroglycerine.
Yep.
So you don't smoke after you drink it, so it could be hazardous. But there was this one guy who was driving a bulldozer D7. He kind of indulged himself with a lot of Calva, and he was in a high spirit and wanted to attack the 12th SS Panzer with his bulldozer.
Yep.
Maybe you should calm down, buddy. So he slept it off under the dozer, and I think the outcome was better.
Probably, that would be... I've heard that story before. Yeah, little Calvadoses. There's so many stories, and some of them make it into the war diaries, and it's just, they're hilarious. And I've heard, nitroglycerin, lighter fluid. It was a unit. It was in Con. I think it was one of the 2nd Division infantry companies. I can't remember which battalion or regiment, but they thought it was lighter fluid when they found it in one of the basements and in one of the cellars in Con. And then they indulged a little too much.
Oof. Yeah. Either you like or you don't, apparently.
Yeah, it's you either like it or you hate it. It's one of those for sure.
So this is the gun position here, Brad. We see the trenches that are parallel with the photo. The second from the left, we can see there's a little line of earth that's exactly underneath where the bracelet was found. The one in the middle near the
right here.
Right, not this one. Yeah, this one exactly, Brad. Yeah, to the right.
Go to the right. Over here.
No, middle.
Right here.
Yeah. Go down a bit. Near the right there. Okay. So that's the one where the bracelet was, and you can see where the ground was bulldozed and adapted to put the gun, because guns had to be moved every 2-3 days because German spotters were looking. Yeah. They were easy targets.
Yeah, you can see it.
And they were lucky because I think they were able to preserve their guns pretty well while they were there. Right. There were some situations, but overall, I mean, a gun is a big target, so they were able to preserve them and use them efficiently against the Germans. At one point in the war diary, they mentioned that they knocked out 14 German tanks in an attempt that Germans did for a counterattack. So artillery is really important, as we mentioned before.
Yeah, especially in this time, hugely important. Yeah, and just another quick observation I want to make is look at a lot of photos of this time period, shockingly enough, and just how far the city has come.
Oh my God.
The buildings of Caen are right there. Like and I've been there and I know this, but it still kind of blows my mind just how much that city has expanded.
It's amazing. It is. So we see very well here under that part of it. Actually, it's an ammunition box, and right underneath was the bracelet. Actually.
Wow, that's amazing. Just want to leave it there for a second so people can take a look, especially after.
Yeah, and as you notice, they are deeper than the other slit trenches. They're mostly 2.5 feet, as others would be 30 centimeters, basically to lay down. But here, since they were gunners, they had to be protected, and their environment was more, if I could use that word, more of a permanent setup, more controllable than slit trenches.
Yeah,
other slit trenches.
Yeah.
So this is the ammunition box under which was the bracelet, and the soil had been trampled, so they were standing there doing their duty, and they've been there for a while.
Yeah.
Say this is not the same one, but I found this one at one point, almost at the end of my dig. So I was lucky because this box is in pretty good shape, and we found it. It was full, so we were wondering, are there some shells in there? We doubted it, but so we decided to open it. That's normally you don't do that, but when you find ammunition, you call the deminers and they come in. They're used to it, and we find on average in France 500 tons of ammo every year, only for World War I. 500 tons, just like that. Farmers, no, not shells again. It's dangerous, as we know. You don't fool around with that. You never know what you're gonna get.
Yep.
And this one was full of earth, and they used it as a protection against shrapnels and whatever could come near the gun.
Yeah, and I say this all the time because this has come up on other shows. If you come across this stuff, don't mess around with it. I've had people say it's fine, and I'm like, it's not fine. Don't touch it.
Just really dangerous. I mean, especially in northern France, where they find shells still having chemicals in there. There are leaks. No, it's not something compared to the Greeks, as I mentioned. When you find something, it's unlikely that you'll die from a Greek vase. But if you find some stuff, especially where First World War took place, you have huge shells over there.
Yeah, it's and I've heard some horror stories. So, say this message all over the time. Don't touch it.
No. Same thing like ammo boxes. So it confirms what we saw in the archives, and we'll see in a second a photo. If I'm not mistaken, I think it's the next.
Well, that's a good question, actually. Things of scale sometimes are hard to tell if you don't see photos. Like, how big are these roughly?
This is about 2 feet, I would say.
Yeah.
2.5 feet by maybe 1 feet. 1 foot, sorry. Yeah, it's not that big. There were 4 shells per ammunition box. See, that's the one we opened.
Yeah.
Very clean, quite in good shape, actually.
Yeah, really good shape. Yeah, wow.
and archives photo showing. So you can only imagine when you see that. At one point, I think it's July 22nd or 23rd, I have to double check, the 6th Field fired 14,000 rounds in one day.
Yep.
So you can imagine all the logistic to bring in all the shells and all they need. They don't want to run out of ammunition. So it tells a lot about those who had to support the combat troops like artillery and infantry. So to bring it and have enough stuff to be able to last a whole day. So that makes it 600 rounds per gun for the whole day. The peel, the paint was peeling off the barrels. The barrels were really red. That's what the officer said. But that's the day where they knocked out 14 German tanks and stopped the German counterattack. So it proved to be useful. But imagine firing at that rate.
It's a lot of shells.
Yeah. This one of the shells that was picked up by us, and we didn't leave them on the field because it would have been stolen. So we picked them up immediately. As I mentioned in my other presentation, I don't know all the symbols here. I would still have a lot to learn. That's okay about that, the codes and everything. But as you know, there were batch numbers and everything. Should one shell misfire, then they would go back. Why didn't it work well? And what could we do? So that's the purpose of this. But since brass was very expensive and rare, they recovered them and reused them mostly.
Yep. Yeah, the casings especially.
Yeah,
it's cool. You can see. Yeah, I don't know all of it either, but 25 pounds, the lot number, the year. It's really cool that you can still see these things after such a long time period. Oh, and Dave Patterson, who's a gunner himself and a historian, guy knows lots of stuff. 150 of those boxes that we're talking about per gun. Like that's when you see those photos, it's a lot.
It tells you a lot, yeah.
Oh, this is a good one. Yeah. Oh, yes.
Yeah, the two long lines you see is a Neolithic monument. So monument was basically carved in the limestone, 1 meter per day with stone. So that must have been quite a tough job and a long job. But this is one of the monuments. And the grayish kind of zone that goes on the left is one of the remnants of the structures of the prisoners of war camp. So that's overlapping the monuments. So basically, between these two, there are approximately 5,000 years because the monument is roughly 3,000 years BC, and the monument is 1944. So they're just one on top of another. That's the magic of layers and all the stratigraphy in archaeology.
That's amazing. That you can see that in one spot like that. That's
right.
That's nice stuff.
Very impressive. Same thing here. Actually, bottles from Canadian trench that are broken on top of that brown area. Here is a Neolithic monument, that had not been dug up yet, but 5,000 years again. Between them, bottles and the monument that was built in. It's one, actually, that's why they made that dig, because it's one of the most important Neolithic sites in France, the most well-documented near Caen. Yeah.
Oh, wow, that's impressive. In the same literal same spot. That's
literally
kind of mind-blowing when you think about it. Yeah.
And this was not Neolithic, as you can see, but this was coming from a Focke-Wulf 190 that was shut down. The serial number of the gun breech boxes were identified as being built in Czechoslovakia, occupied Czechoslovakia, and the pilot was not there anymore, but they found some of the coins that belonged to him, like this one from 1941. And I think the next one we see the dent.
Yes.
Yeah, the big dent.
I can remember what that was going through the.
Yeah, so they kind of carved the limestone. Unfortunately, we found remnants of Allied airplanes too. We were not able to identify which one exactly. There were earphones that had probably been shut down by the flak battery or batteries around that. So sadly, those Allied airmen went down there too. But this German plane for sure was identified without problem.
That's pretty unmistakable when you find the guns and the coin and the big hole in the limestone.
And to give you an idea, that big dent, Brad, is about 3 to 4 meters wide.
Yeah.
So that's
Sounds
pretty
about right.
big.
Yeah.
So this is one of the gun batteries, not Harry's battery, but one of them, which was actually the command battery. We know it from the military map and the code from the map at the time. And we see that long pole there that was attached to cans in which holes were pierced. It was a mobile bath that was attached to a truck. And it's mentioned in the war diary. So the mobile bath came today. Men were so happy to have a shower. And there's, you can see very well that it's been worked out with the bull to put where the gun was. Obviously, they took the gun away. But there's a marble plaque on the left side that might have been used for showering, and that came from nearby houses. They used to retrieve whatever they could from nearby houses, chairs, tables, to make their life less miserable or more comfortable as much as they could. And so that's another interesting thing. What was integrated to create more or less comfort. And it's very interesting depending on the countries. Like when you see a Canadian side, there are very typical Canadian artifacts. I think the next one. No, not yet. This one is a brazier that was near the gun battery. So they used a jerry can pierced hole in it and used to reheat food on site. And you still can see how it was used. It's really good.
Oh, yes. That's been, yeah.
This is the toaster.
Yeah.
My colleagues didn't know what it was. Say, what's this? Oh, it's a toaster. Because we used to, well, we still eat sliced bread. So they didn't eat sliced bread in France. They use baguette. So this is a typical Canadian thing that you would use in camping. On American sides, they find Coca-Cola bottles, chewing gum. So that's everything that pertains to the troops that were there. So it's interesting. It's kind of a signature of who was where and when.
Yeah, you can leave your mark in your almost stereotypical fashion. I think
it's true.
That's great. And it's like we were talking at the beginning, just real quick, of how these things come together, right? We know these things from history and recollections and oral history. And, the Americans talk about the Coke and getting the Coke all the time. We know these things now, and we can be like, yeah, we found them. I think that's just, it makes sense. Obviously, you're like, there's going to be there. But when you actually see it brought out again, it's just, I don't know, maybe that's the nerd in me, but it's so fascinating.
It is, yeah. And again, these are tiny details that tell a lot about who was there.
Yeah.
Those bottles, some intact still had liquid in it. And on the right, you see that little
stubby one,
short bottle, brown there. It's a Bovril bottle. Yeah, this one. But, again, where you use it with meat. It's a enhancer for meat, sauce. So these are details, but interesting. You see there's a button there right there.
Yeah.
That came from a uniform, and the white cap of a French beer from Bayeux.
yeah, there it is.
A local one.
Yeah, that's cool. Yes.
Utensils, usually, as you know, Canadians were using British material, but some were clearly identified for Canadians. This one was imprinted with a C, proving that it's a Canadian troop, but most of the material was not necessarily marked. They just used it and as it came by. Funny. This dentures, the guy, I don't know if he took too many beers, but basically his dentures left him. Actually, it was left behind. So I made some research on that, and there's a service number imprinted on it, and I was able to identify that it belonged to Le Regiment Maisonneuve, 2nd Battalion. But when I contacted Library and Archives Canada, they said, "Oh no, it's a serial number," and I disagreed with them because the number really fits a service number with the regiment that was on site actually at the time. So the sad part of the story, and I mention it in the book, is that the service number, several service files were destroyed in the 60s or 70s for privacy reasons, and so his file must have been destroyed at the time. The only thing I was able to retrieve was kind of a certificate from 1954 that bore the same number, but it's an RMA number. And it said it's very likely not the same man 10 years after, and from the militia. So I doubt it's the same, but that's the only thing. It's frustrating when you think that files were destroyed. It could have told so much. I contacted the regiment. They made research, couldn't find anything either. So far, the denture is a mystery in the becoming.
Yeah, it's too bad.
Yeah. And again, it brings us back to the prisoners of war camp, how ingenious people were. They used ammunition boxes to create wastewater pipes, create a basin here to kind of deal with the wastewater. So these are the things you wouldn't find necessarily in books, but this is based on the requirements of the moment on a site and how do we have to deal with that, what was done to deal with it, and what were the resources available. So in this case, it's a very clever situation, I must say, a very good solution, since you can put all this and it's still very visible. And it went quite a distance, I must say. And people were living, we talked about the people who were living in the quarries for over 50 days. That must have been quite a rough experience with stale air. It's not healthy. But I mean, it's better to be there than being in the outside under the shelling. But this shows also how hard, we knew it, but how hard it must have been for civilians to cope with that. You don't even know if your house is intact. The village might be just rumbles, and then you come back, and but at least you're alive. Mm-hmm. But those were difficult conditions, and you can tell that it was something that needed to be addressed. And they made some research. My colleagues have studied it thoroughly. They made a 3D reconstruction of that.
Oh, wow. To
literally have something for heritage and posterity and history, so that we can know what they were, how they were living. And Mrs. Letimonier, who was 11 at the time, said there's one thing you'll never see in pictures, it's the odor. So the stench and everything, said that's something you never get in pictures or artifacts. I say, wow, I didn't think about that. But same thing when veterans said, you see pictures, but the odor, dead bodies and everything, that's something you never forget. So she said the same thing about here.
Yeah, this is an amazing photo that survives. That's fantastic. Yeah, so that's the last one.
Yeah, that was the last one.
I forgot to mention earlier, but we mentioned it throughout, is the book. I've linked down below where you can purchase it. If you want to, can you just talk about that? Because you're not on Amazon yet, right?
Not yet, no. So it's available on Bouquinbec. It's self-publishing. Okay. So the book was to tell the story of Harry, all his life, actually his service and after his life. So he came back safely, thank God. And I'm in touch with the family now. So the book was published in February 23, actually, a few months ago.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, it's fairly recent. And it's on sale at Juno Beach Center.
Oh, awesome.
It's on sale at the Canadian War Museum, too. And on some libraries, local libraries here in Elmer. But I'm still in the process of fine-tuning and nailing down the selling on Amazon. As soon as it will be, I will let you know. Brad.
Awesome. Yeah, and then I'll update it and then probably do a social media.
Thank you.
Blast. I don't know what to call it anymore. Hitting all the different ones about this, because this is such a fascinating story. I don't know. It's just, to me, when all these different things come together, you know, history, personal biography, and archaeology, and Neolithic sites. It's just that there's a lot going on here, and it's amazing that, you know, you were able to be part of this project and to share it with us. That's fantastic that we get to hear about this and get to see these things that you don't necessarily always get to see, right? You get to maybe see it a little bit in a documentary for a few minutes, but to see it in depth is fantastic.
And that's what I tell my students all the time. You use one personal story to enter the subject, the topic, and then from that story, it's easier to relate. Say, okay, this young man was 22 years old. He lived like that. He was eating this. Oh, it's like me. And then you get to a broader picture, like there were thousands of men, which gives information, but it's not the same as if you can relate to one specific young man that could be you actually, and you see that how they were living at the time and say, oh, compared to, in contrast, what's going on today, say, wow, I'm so comfortable now. I have such a good life.
Mm-hmm.
But they went through, I mean, it's terrible what they went through. But then that's the best door I find to enter the subject, and then from that to get a broader view of the big picture.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's a good way to put it. And we were just talking before we went on about how I think maybe it's a Canadian thing, how this is not all integrated yet, right? You're talking about how that's done in other countries, and in here we're not doing that, and I think that's a bit of a shame because we can learn so much from each other, and we don't, particularly when these more, like I said earlier, modern times of this modern archaeology and battlefield archaeology is something that I think we need to do more of. Obviously, it's tricky because it's in other countries, a lot of it, but
yeah, that's why I wrote the book, first to pay tribute to Harry Edward Fox and his family, but the second purpose was to make people aware or question about battlefield archaeology for World War II, especially in Canada. Obviously, we know the sites are over there in Europe, and we send people. But still, if it could just plant a little seed to get some interest in what battlefield archaeology could bring for Canadians in Canadian context of Europe, obviously, that would be something very interesting. So that's my purpose here. And I learned so much from that, knowing that we did the dig and everything, and it's all pertaining to different topics that come together. And this is making it very interesting. Yeah,
it's fascinating that all of this. I mean, again, sort of a bit of loss for words. That happens to me when I get really into the stories that we do in the live streams. It's so fascinating, and I'm glad to know this because I'm going to be going there next year. So this is on the list now. I know you can't really get at it anymore, but I'll park as legally close as I can. Try to hit a tram, or the tram hit me. But I'll try to get to this area, maybe park at the IKEA and look across the field, maybe. But yeah, no, I'm excited to get to add another area that you might not know much about when you're there and have no idea what it is. But now we do. So it's great. Yeah. So I wanted to ask about the publisher. Are they shipping just Canada, North America?
Everywhere. You just go online. I think you had the link under the presentation.
I do. Yeah, it's linked down below for anyone who's interested.
Add to cart, and you can. I have people who bought it from Africa, Europe, everywhere. Yeah.
That's awesome. Wow. Oh, there you go. That answers that question. International. Yeah, so that's great. So everyone check that out. Oh, and yes, I forgot to say earlier, I now have, wrong way, my own shirt now. Woohoo, I finally got one. That's linked down below too if you want to get some merch of me, of my channel, OTD, and help out. And I'll be doing a live stream on Saturday, trying to drum up some more support for the channel. So if anyone can come watch that as well, that'd be great, trying to get some more patrons and YouTube channel members. So everyone look forward to that at 2 p.m. on Saturday. Other than that, thank you, Denis. Did you enjoy coming on here? Didn't give you too many hard questions, I don't think.
Thank you for inviting me. Thank you so much.
Well, no, you're more than welcome. Thank you for coming on. And yeah, so everyone get the book, and I'll see you on Saturday, everybody.
Thank you.
Have a good one, everyone.
Bye.